Welcome to another frontline affair on a current issue of some importance. This tonight is really about Anna Politkovskaya and issues related to her death. And we have an excellent panel, a very large one, who will speak to these issues and some of the environment around the issues. And I'll introduce them, if I may, and then tell you there's somebody else waiting on a Skype phone in Moscow. If that actually works, we may be able to get him as well. His name is Roman Shlenov, who's the investigative editor of Novaya Gazeta, which is what Anna worked for. But immediately on my left is Lord Frank Judd, who was the former rapporteur of the Political Affairs Committee of the Council of Europe on the Chechnyan crisis, and was, he just told me, the former director of Oxfam. He is extremely knowledgeable about this area, having visited Chechnya 9 times, and we'll come to him about those issues. The next one, Gary Bush, is a consultant on international relations and political risks, specializing in Russia. He's been involved in business in Russia and has a trade union background in the United States. To his left is Aidan White, General Secretary of the IFJ, the International Federation of Journalists, who've been involved in major human rights issues involving journalism, and in fact human rights in general, and is well known, I'm sure, to most of you. And then on the far end, Ahmed Zakayev, who was a senior Chechnyan envoy in the UK, and I'm told is on Russia's wanted list, and with long experience in precisely the area in which Anna Politkovskaya wrote so eloquently. Now, should we get through? Can we get through to Moscow?
We're going to try.
Okay. Be slightly patient with us. I love it, yeah. That's great.
Да, слушали.
Алло, Роман, здравствуйте. Вы нас слышите?
Здравствуйте, да.
Хорошо, сейчас мы переходим к дискуссии.
Perhaps he could be kind enough to tell us what the latest news is on the investigation they're going to mount, and they are mounting, and what they've discovered so far.
Роман, нас слышите?
Да.
Расскажите, пожалуйста, на каком этапе стоит расследование и что происходит, какие последние новости?
Можно по-русски говорить, да?
Лучше по-английски.
Well, I can tell that there are some news from the investigators because you see the investigation is the closed sphere and we can't make any statements now, and the people who represented the state prosecutor's office can't make any statements now. They just told that the official investigation is under control of the Prosecutor General of Russia, of Mr. Chayka. So I suppose and I hope, and everybody, I think, in Novaya Gazeta hope that the investigation will be independent and complete.
But in the worry of whether it's independent, are you intending to investigate separately from the government?
Certainly, we will try to find everything that we can, and we try to do everything we can to find more evidences and to find more facts about it. As you know, one of the shareholders of Novaya Gazeta announced that he will give something like 1 million euros to those who will give the complete information about those who killed Anna Politkovskaya. So we will do everything to find more about the killers and about the contract killers. I mean, certainly, if we will see that the investigation is not independent, we will ask our questions, and we will do everything to make all the questions and all the answers public.
In terms of Anna's last piece, is that piece in the public domain now?
Был ли опубликован ее последний материал?
Well, certainly. We have published her last material, her last text, and we hope that in the nearest issue we will publish some more materials written by Anna Politkovskaya. Her last article was dedicated to torture in Chechen Republic. She got small images from mobile phones where there are two people. One man is Russian, the other is Chechen. So it can be seen that they were suffering. It can be seen that it's a problem of torture. She wrote about the problem of torture in Chechnya. As I know, we gave this photo, these small images taken from a small video to the prosecutor's office, and they must conduct their own investigation dedicated to this problem.
Do you have any recollective thoughts about Anna's last days in the office when you were there?
You see, Anna was not always present in the office last days because she had a personal tragedy. Her mother was in the hospital, and the doctors told it was a cancer, last stage, and her father died when he knew about it. Anna was in a horrible state. Certainly, you know that it's not very easy to get such an information, and certainly I can't remember that she was in the office at the time.
Is there any resources that you feel that you might lack to prosecute an investigation parallel with the government?
No. As I know, there are no evidence now that something can be connected with the Russian government. But I can say that the last materials of Anna Politkovskaya was about Ramzan Kadyrov. It's the Prime Minister of Chechen Republic. She strongly criticized Ramzan Kadyrov and people from his surroundings, and she also strongly criticized Kremlin for its politics in the Caucasus. So this is all the information we have. As I know, she was the witness in several criminal cases started by the prosecutor's office concerning, and these criminal cases concerned the torture in Chechnya, and Anna Politkovskaya considered that Ramzan Kadyrov personally and the people from his surroundings took part in kidnappings, in killing people, and in torture.
Wilson, thank you very much for spending so much time with us, and we'll proceed with the meeting, and thank you very much.
Спасибо.
Thank you, bye.
I wanted to say a few words before the panel begins, because last month the deputy chairman of Russia's central bank and a key regulator of Russia's rather anarchic banking system, a haven of money laundering and financial crime, was himself murdered. The year before, an owner of several banks, his wife, daughter, a nun and priest were all shot dead with impunity. And the question clearly is, if a senior government official and an important banker can be hit, how safe, one must ask, can any journalist be? To add to the difficulty, a search for those who would profit from the death of a journalist is disturbingly complex. As the Klebnikov Project has reported, journalists have difficulty identifying the guilty and accurately describing the violent cabals at work. Amidst Kremlin power struggles, the secret police and military for hire, the oligarchs, local gangsters, Chechen terrorists, embezzlers, and the webs of organized crime from Moscow to Chechnya to London and New York, all are a substantial obstacle to any clear investigation. I'm hoping that perhaps the panel tonight can illuminate some of that, some of the key players and the forces that are responsible, and what pops at the end we can do about it. And towards that end, I'd like to ask Gary Bush to describe, as he can as a participant in the economy of Russia, what his general reactions to that environment are.
Is this working?
Yeah.
Wonderful. I shan't be very long, but my experience in Russia is not as a journalist. I was there for about 5-6 years setting up the Russian aluminium industry. We worked in the factories and we started from the very beginning. And one of the things that I found that when I got there is that although things had changed from before, they hadn't really changed very much. The same people that we were dealing with before the changeover under Gorbachev tended to be the same people we were dealing with afterwards. The Russian leadership was very concerned that they were going to have some serious problems making the economy work. We got to the factories. No factory had any money. Everything was done on the command economy. So when we wanted to make aluminium, nobody knew what aluminium cost. No one had any price for electricity. No one knew what the railroads cost. No one could order anything around. So there was no cost. There was no prices. Nobody had any savings. And they'd fire 60,000 people from Gosplan, so nobody knew what they were doing anyway. So we met with several people, Silayev, Oleg Soskevets, with several of the others in the government, and they had a plan. The plan was they were going to send all the money, the rubles and gold, out of Russia and get cash and then bring it back in again. To do this, they enlisted the services of a large number of people in the criminal elements because the legal people couldn't do it. And these people moved money, gold, and everything out of the country as fast as they possibly could. Now, we then were asked to help by bringing in expertise and cash. We did a thing called tolling, which meant that we would pay for all the raw materials, supplies, energy, labor, for all the materials, bring them into the factories, produce the aluminium, and we would pay a fee to the people who actually ran the smelters. So we prepaid everything. But the people who helped us most, one of the things that people misunderstand, the mafia were the most important, productive people in the country. We couldn't have made that work without the mafia because they were the only people who had liquid cash in the country. So when we wanted to do any business, we would transfer money, or in many cases we would transfer cigarettes and alcohol closer to the mafia, and they would give us rubles, which we could then pay everybody in the country. And they facilitated things that the government couldn't possibly facilitate. Because in Russia, everything went through Moscow. So if we wanted to send money from to Vanina, we would have to wait 5 months for the money to get from Moscow to Vanina. So we dealt directly with them. Unfortunately, they became extremely powerful. At the same time, the government decided that there were no institutions which were able to function the way they would like to make the economy work. So they took young men, from the Komsomol and the rest, people like Politkovskaya and Aven and the others, and they empowered them. They gave them banks to run. They gave them companies to function. And they set it up. They were handling the money for Long Pond, Lubievsky, Soloseva, all the various groups, and they were moving their money out. Once they had set up these companies and these banks, under Yeltsin, they decided to move the money back. So you had these fake auctions where everything was being privatized for peanuts. But the money that was paid for this was the money the Russians had already taken out to Cyprus. This wasn't new money. This was money that they had moved out, and they're now buying back Russian industry. The same people who were doing this became the leadership structure, not the oligarchs. The oligarchs were chosen for one reason. Why would they choose the oligarchs why are most of the oligarchs Jews? Because there's nobody in the Duma who's going to stand up and protect them. They were the most vulnerable people in Russia, and therefore they were the good people to have as oligarchs. they had no, they knew that there would be no support from them anywhere if something went wrong. So they became very wealthy. The mafia was then told, please, after Putin came in, Putin was very knowledgeable about this. When we signed our first contract in St. Petersburg for the export of aluminium, the contract name on the bottom is Vladimir Putin. He was part of the system, and he worked. And he brought in many of the Czechs that he had worked with before. Czech, I don't know if it's a general term, meaning MBD, KGB, GRU, the various people. What you now have is that the very people who are taking over, who now call themselves Siloviki, and there's more factions of Siloviki than there are Trotskyists. But they all are now moving into the kinds of businesses which the oligarchs have built. So as the oligarchs leave it, you now have what they like to call oligarchs in epaulets. These are the oligarchs who now have military ties. There's about 6,000 in the Russian government. When they first started the elections, the first election to the Duma, there was 2,785 KGB candidates. The KGB did a number of people, they briefed them. 86% of them took office. And there are people at every level in the Duma, at every level of the government, and now the Siloviki run large numbers of businesses. The problem at the moment is Putin is going. And the Siloviki, the Czechs from before, who don't like very much the people from St. Petersburg who came in afterwards, are now positioning themselves for a new run at power. Now, this is not an ideological thing. I'll just take one more second. The reason why the Siloviki are in there and they're powerful is very simple. Why do they go after Yukos? Because there is no insider trading rule in Russia. Everybody who knows what's going to happen is making a fortune. They have their own banks, they have their own investment companies, and if they know they're going to say, we're going to stop production in this field, they all sell, and then when the price goes down, they buy again. They made billions of dollars on Yukos. They're making billions of dollars on Gazprom. They're making billions of dollars on Lukoil at the moment, and now they're having a nice time in Sakhalin trying to stop the production. Not because of any great centralization, although that's part of it. It's because it makes them wealthy. I mean, Occam's razor. You don't have to look for all kinds of arcane reasons. There's a good reason. They're making money from it. And with money comes power. And everybody who does business has to have his own krisha, a roof. You have people who look after you, people whom you hire. We used to call them rabbis. You have someone who's important for you. And unfortunately, you have what's known as the red krisha, who are the police and army people whom you hire to look after you. Sometimes they look after you better than the other people look after you. To be a Russian banker, the World Wildlife Fund is having them declared an endangered species. There are 216 of them dead in the last 20 years. It's a very journalists have a hard time, bankers have it worse. So, in this climate where you have, I don't know, if you were Marxist, I would tell you this is Bonapartism, where you have the 18th Brumaire, written by Marx, saying that when they Louis Napoleon, you got a travesty of a state where the security apparatus suddenly takes over, and the president himself is not as powerful as everybody thinks, which is true. And there is flux because Putin's going, the various oligarchs are losing their power, the various Siloviki clans are moving one against the other. People like Ryman, for example, who's not a Siloviki, but he would like to be. He knows that his power lay with Lyudmila Putina, who was his employee, and when Putin goes, he's out. So you'll have a new minister of communications. There are all these changes taking place. So it's a time of great flux in Russia. It's a time when you can't really tell the players without a scorecard. So when there's murder of this journalist, it doesn't surprise me because I suspect there'll be plenty more in the years and weeks to come. Thank you.
Aidan, I wonder if I could call on... Yeah, sorry.
Aidan, I wonder if I could call on you for a general description from a journalist's point of view of what she would have encountered.
If that was depressing, then you ought to sort of hear what the situation is for journalists. I mean, the general situation as far as journalism is concerned in Russia has been one of sort of slow decline into sort of constant pressure of one form or another over the past 10 years. We've seen the decline significantly in terms of real pluralism within the Russian media. The national television networks have essentially been taken over either by the sort of close friends of the Putin regime or by state organizations themselves. You have very little space for dissent and alternative opinion and so on. And I think the tragedy of Anna Politkovskaya's death is that when you see the disdain, contempt that was expressed by senior Russian figures, they take the view that they had successfully obscured the message that she was bringing from the mainstream of the Russian population. They think it's a job well done, and they can't quite understand why there's so much fuss being made about this outside Russia. And I think it shows the sort of shocking nature of the lack of pluralism, the lack of sort of real opportunity for people to express opinions, to jostle for ideas, to be jostling in that sort of landscape. The situation is extremely difficult. I mean, at its worst, it's a situation where in the last 12 years, around 43 journalists have been killed. They've been killed in various ways. They've been shot. Some of them have been blown up by briefcase bombs. Some of them just been simply beaten to death. Others have been in horrifying circumstances, hit by axes and so on. Many of them have been investigative journalists. Since Putin came to power, Anna's killing was the 13th. Not one single person has been brought to justice in any of these cases. So you can understand that actually among journalists and within media, there's no great feeling that they can rush to into print or onto the air with stories that are going to be in any way seriously critical of the regime. The problem about it is that we've seen this decline in pluralism in terms of ownership. There's a lot of self-censorship. Of course there are voices, there are alternative voices. It would be wrong to say that, this is a country in which there are not alternative voices. It's true, but they're marginalised. They're marginalised to the extent that they have very little influence altogether. But they are there. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why, for example, we work with our colleagues in the Russian Union of Journalists to try to support and to nurture this sort of alternative views and opinions and so on. I mean, it does seem to me that this crisis for media, poses very serious questions for Democrats in Europe and elsewhere. I mean, it seems to me organisations like the Council of Europe, the European Union, which has a summit meeting tomorrow with Russian leaders. I mean, they talk the talk and rhetoric of human rights and cultural freedoms and so on. What they don't do is actually deliver seriously on action to try to bring about genuine reform and change. I mean, we're going to talk about here, which is a regime which has created a democratic culture in decay, something in which it is almost impossible to imagine virtuous community, organisation to emerge. It requires international action to begin to deal with it. And as far as we're concerned in media, one sign of that would be some international pressure to deal with this problem of impunity in the killings of journalists. Let's have proper investigations. Let's have some results. And, I have to say, from where we're sitting, much as I hear from my colleagues in Moscow and elsewhere, there isn't much optimism that we're going to get a serious and proper response to these challenges.
Actually, I'd like to ask you, Ahmed, if you could describe the situation in Chechnya, where 25 journalists, as I understand it, have already been killed, and which has been described as probably the single most dangerous place for independent journalists to operate anywhere, and what it's like, in fact, for journalists to work in that sort of place, and your experience in that area.
let me introduce. I am the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Chechen Republic and the official representative of the acting President Dr. Umarov, who the successor to Aslan Maskhadov and the successor to Aslan Maskhadov and Abdul Halim Sadullayev, who were assassinated by the Russia secret services, acting under the direct orders of Russia's president, who is a commander and chief of Russia's military and intelligence services. For more than 10 years now, I have been a direct participant in the military and political process under Chechnya itself and now around Chechnya. The little information released by the press departments of the Russian ministries and agencies is intended to divert attention from objective facts. Anna Politkovskaya did everything she could to convey the truth about Chechnya and Russia itself. Motivated by human sympathy and sense of professional duty, Anna never succumbed to fear or to the official anti-Chechen hysteria. She was one of the few Russian journalists who systematically, year after year, exposed the crimes against humanity, which is a Russian military machine exercised upon the defenseless civilian population of the Chechen Republic. I had the honor of being personally acquainted with Anna Politkovskaya and never ceased to admire her courage and moral integrity combined with deep humanity. Anna Politkovskaya was deeply convinced that economic interests of certain countries and political careers of certain politicians should not be more important than human rights, freedom of speech, and the fate of a million people nation. Over the last few years, in the Chechen Republic, we have more than 250,000 of innocent victims among the civilians. 40,000 of them children serve as a sufficient ground to initiate a war tribunal against Russian war criminals. Anna, she is always reminded the illusion some political circles have about Russia's democratic progress are fatally dangerous for the whole mankind, because there are serious and convincing reasons to believe that Russia is developing not by any well-known democratic principles, but using the principles of opposing Russia's interests to the interests of the rest of the world. Anna knew the world needs to find a way to make comply with the legal rules of conduct in the family of nations of the world. By urging Russia to stop the genocide of the Chechen people, the international community will not lose Russia as a partner. On the contrary, that would make Russia seriously think about potential problems it may face if it ignores the demands of the rest of the civilized world. At this point, the international community should not fear that the Russian public would not understand it. Russians have matured politically and able, when the moment is right, to change their political leaders who filing to civilized dialogue and again putting the nation into the dangers of being politically isolated. For me, as for all Anne's friends and those who worked alongside her, her death is also a personal death. I call upon the world community to condemn in the strongest possible terms the demonstrative execution of one of the foremost champions of human rights and freedoms, and to conduct an independent international inquiry into these heinous acts of terrorism. I believe that if no independent investigation is done, the responsible ones will not be punished. The purpose of her death is to intimidate other honorable journalists and politicians in Russia who remain independent of the state authorities. I again would like to express my deep condolences to the family and friends of Anna Politkovskaya. The memory of this great Russia woman who shared the tragedy of the Chechen people and did everything she could to convey the truth about it to the world community, will forever remain in our hearts and will in the course of time be repatriated in the Republic of Chechnya. Recently, I have received information from the President's administration of the Chechen Republic, Dr. Umarov, that the Republican House of Press will be named in honor of Anna Politkovskaya. Thank you very much. Thank you for your coming. Thank you for your attention.
Lord Judd, maybe you could describe a bit of what you saw in Chechnya and your experiences in relation to it, as it was so central to everything that Anna Politkovskaya did.
I wonder if I might Hello? Working? Are we working?
Yep.
Good. I wonder if I might first just say a word or two about Anna. I was fortunate to meet her on a number of occasions over the years. She was a woman of immense courage and integrity. She wasn't an easy person. She was tough. She gave me a tough time at times when I was doing the rapporteur's job. Indeed, her analysis, I found, not only salutary, not easy, but not only salutary, but it helped me to think through what I was really involved in and the conclusions to which I came. What I admired about Anna was that she had no illusions about the dangers she was running. She didn't have a sort of romantic premonition about what might happen to her, but she had a realistic, tough assessment of what might happen to her, and it happened. But she stuck with it because she believed that her professional and personal responsibility was to tell the truth as she saw it. And I think that is a tremendous challenge to all of us in public life. I'm sure it's a challenge to the journalistic profession, but it's a challenge to all of us. Integrity and truth. It seems to me that no democracy or any attempt at democracy can be better than the quality of the information on which it is functioning. And this is why I am one of those who believe that there is a historic destiny about your profession of journalism, because it does provide the fuel for democracy. And I don't want to get involved in that tonight, but I think Anna's death not only raises immediate issues, but raises very profound issues about the kind of society we're living in here, not only in Russia, and how far the quality of which is possible, it's not the quality of journalists, but the quality which is possible for journalists to deploy is on the up or on the down. And as one who cares desperately about freedom and democracy, I trouble about that. I worry about that. Now to the situation. In one respect, I think the Russians have been very successful. When I say the Russians, I mean the Russian Federation. The government, the Kremlin, has been very successful. What do I mean by this? It has set out to isolate Chechnya, and it has done pretty well. It is very difficult for journalists to get access to Chechnya. I was reading today, I'm sure others of you have read even more about it, that courageous humanitarian and NGO organizations which are trying to operate in Chechnya and the North Caucasus are encountering more and more difficulties, and their activities are being closed down. And what they've had to say has been crucial to any information that is coming out of Chechnya at all. There are still some immensely courageous Russians working in Russian NGOs like Memorial, for people for whom I formed the highest respect. But I saw that only 2 days ago or so, one of the key leaders of Memorial, who has tried, as it were, to be constructive and to participate in advice to the Kremlin about the situation, has resigned in desperation because following Anna's death, just felt the situation was so untenable. Has resigned from the advisory body in which serving. Now, I mean, the trouble is, having done this, you said some very generous things about how knowledgeable I was. I have, in all honesty, to say that I got involved enough really to know how little I know. And I'm very humble about that. But let me just try and say a couple of things. First of all, there is no monopoly of cruelty and violence on any one side in this situation, and I don't think it helps to pretend that there is. I sometimes, and Ahmed and I, as good friends, often, I think, have a complete meeting of minds about this, that when atrocities are undertaken, when there are atrocities by militants on the Chechen side, they're not only wrong, but politically they're counterproductive and therefore totally unacceptable. And they're betraying the cause. When governments which claim membership of the Council of Europe, which if it's about anything is about human rights, freedom, democratic systems, when they become involved in the sort of activity which has been pursued by the Russian authorities in Chechnya, this is even worse because they have all the facilities of government and yet they are indulging in the very worst betrayal of the ideals which they say they espouse. So the disappearances, the torture, the humiliation, the destruction, the wanton, persistent destruction, I shall never forget. Some of you have had this experience frequently in your professional lives, but for me, as an ordinary person, although I had a lot of experiences as director of Oxfam, going into Grozny as one of the first people from Western political life to go into Grozny after the bombardment in 2000. I was with a group of parliamentarians from Europe, and as parliamentarians get together, when we were travelling, there was usually a lot of talk and animated discussion going on. When we came into Grozny, we just felt totally silent. And I can remember this was what impressed me, the shock. The absolute systematic destruction of this city. Somebody said, was everything flattened to me afterwards? No, everything was not flattened, but what was worse was it seemed to me that anything was still standing would have to be flattened before any meaningful reconstruction could take place. It was in the sense, and I don't exaggerate, like a nuclear explosion without, hopefully, the radioactivity, but it was just total. And this was Russia at the beginning of the new millennium, Russia claiming to be committed, having given all sorts of undertakings, claiming to be a member of the Council of Europe. So the humanitarian, the human rights issues are huge. But in the short time allotted to me, I want to make one other point, which is a bit difficult and is quite controversial. I feel about Russian action in Chechnya very much as I feel about American activity in Guantanamo Bay. I have been a minister. I've been a minister in defense. I've been a minister in the Foreign Office. I care about the future. I'm a grandfather, which is a damn sight more important than being a minister. I'm a grandfather. I care about my grandchildren's future. In that context, I care as much as anybody about the threats and implications of global terrorism. What I find in my older age I become, and I mean it, angry about is wanton counterproductivity. Pursuing policies which are actually aggravating the issues with which we are largely preoccupied in policy. Russian action and the way it has been undertaken in this climate of impunity, because one of the issues all the time was the number of complaints, the number of well-documented complaints that were made about Russian activity, hardly anybody brought to justice for what happened. What is this doing to young Chechens? It seems to be demonstrating that there is no moderate way forward, that if you really are opposed to what the country is suffering, if you really care for the dignity of your people, you must begin to look to militant, tough extremism. And of course, Chechnya has acquired a symbolic significance in the interface with militant Islam across the world, way beyond the issue of Chechnya itself. I mean, it's obviously affecting the North Caucasus as a whole very widely, but it's developed a very great symbolic significance in the struggle. And the message going out to Islam young people, but not only young people, is again, there's no way forward moderately. One has to become militant and extreme to make one's position known. Now, it seems to me that the West, by condoning this, or by the very best failing to make it a major issue in our relationships with Russia, is behaving in a totally inexplicable, irrational way. Because it's actually condoning policies which are aggravating the issues with which politicians are most preoccupied across the Western world, the issues of global terrorism, insecurity, and the rest. And therefore, it seems to me we've all got a very heavy responsibility in the interests of the Chechen people, of course, in the interests of decency and the values we care about, of course, but in the interests of a sane, rational approach to world security. Perhaps I could just conclude by saying that sometimes I catch myself thinking, but Frank, have you become so upset and angry about this political counterproductivity that you've lost sight of the basic issues of human rights? I assure you I haven't. Obviously, my visits to Chechnya were in rather constrained situations, but they were visits to Chechnya. And I, as I talk to you, I honestly have got those pictures of those people, those faces, those men, women, children, who have suffered grievously and continue to suffer, try to make a go of it. And one of the most cynical things that's now happening, and this is my last point, one of the most cynical things that's now happening is a tendency in Western circles to say, yes, well, all this may be true, but now at least there is a kind of order in Chechnya. And this I find very sinister and cynical. What kind of order is it? It's the order of oppression, fear. Yes, Kadyrov is quite good at bribing communities, if need be. That's the way the mafia, you say, operates. You know when a bit of money here in a community may help to buy off a bit of political pressure with a hospital or a school or some kind of facility. But basically, it's oppression and fear that is maintaining this so-called stability. I am convinced, I hope history proves me wrong, but I am convinced that under that stability, the pressure cauldron is building up. And I don't believe that there is a sustained stability and security being achieved in Chechnya at all. And I believe the implications are not just for the Chechen people, not just for the people of North Caucasus. And when we talk on the North Caucasus and the region, for God's sake, yes, of course we've got oil interests. Of course we've got energy interests. Then for God's sake, let's get down to the task of building stable, sustainable societies, not societies that are about to explode. And it seems to me, therefore, that we mustn't allow ourselves to be deluded by the new cynicism that tells us, well, okay, there's order, and something may now be possible. It's a very dangerous kind of order.
Some weeks ago, Anna Politkovskaya came to speak in London and at an event that we ran for investigative journalists at City University. And she spoke to a crowded house, and it was responsive, and people were surprised how many people turned up to hear her, because she, in many respects, wasn't known to a lot of people outside the journalistic community or the political community, but a lot of people did. But to counter but to support what you said, she spoke quite knowledgeably a long time about the politicians, and I quoted this, politicians and gangsters who profited in the destruction of the Chechnyan war, and she described them as the scum who live next to us. And no wonder, I thought, with language like that she would be in some difficulty. Towards that end, I think we could open up, unless somebody on the panel has some point to make, we could open it up for questions from the audience. Go ahead. We need a microphone.
Please wait for the mics.
Hello. I was wondering if any or all of you could give us some sense of the scale of what you've been saying about Russia in comparison to other countries. It's easy to understand that things there are terrible, perhaps dangerous, in a worrying state vis-à-vis democracy and journalist rights and everything. It's difficult to get a sense of how that compares to, I don't know, the rest of Eastern Europe, Zimbabwe, Burma, Western Europe.
Well, just very briefly, the question of impunity and the problem about facing journalists, for example, is in that region a serious problem. We have the case of Georgy Gongadze in the Ukraine, a journalist like Politkovskaya, a courageous investigative journalist, exposing corruption, political corruption at the highest level, butchered 6 years ago, and in the 6 years since that, each government in the Ukraine has absolutely failed. There's been clear neglect and a lack of responsibility in finding who is responsible. We have the same problem in the Belarus. We have a government which actually doesn't have a respect for the press and so on. We have journalists who've been killed. We have the problem of impunity. Look, the difficulty facing journalists these days can be summed up basically with two distinct problems. One is the power of the press. We live in an age in which information circulates the globe in seconds. The press are more powerful, have more capacity to influence than they've ever had in human history. It actually means that for people in power, people who want to keep information secret, people who want to sort of make sure that certain things don't get out, then the press and the people who work in the media are potentially dangerous opponents. They have to be controlled. And wherever you have unstable government, where you have a lack of democracy, you'll find the press under fire. In Colombia, the situation has been absolutely scandalous. Today, in Iraq, a journalist can't walk the streets, Iraqi or not, because of the possibility of targeting. In the Philippines, journalists have been routinely killed and so on. So we have a real problem about this. It is no question in my mind at all. A barometer on the quality of democracy in any country will depend upon the respect that's given to the capacity of media to function and the capacity for journalists to work freely and in security. And wherever a journalist is being killed or media are being attacked violently and so on, that is a country which is in big trouble. And it has to be recognised. So I think if you look at the scale of things, yes, Russia, it fits. Unfortunately, you can check all the boxes. It's a country which is in big trouble. It's a democracy that is in name only. It doesn't function. There's no rule of law in any section of society. There's no proper understanding of democratic pluralism, either as a political or a civil sort of concept for the operation of society. And you have no respect, fundamentally, for human rights. Now, that seems to me to be a pretty big crisis on the borders of the European Union, and not one that is taken sufficiently seriously.
I would also like to add a few words in answer to your question.
Мне кажется, если бы вот этот вопрос, который вы задали, если бы западные политики просто поставили бы себе перед собой этот вопрос, была бы совершенно другая ситуация.
If Western politicians decided to tackle this issue, the situation would be very different today.
То, что происходит сегодня в России, к этому нельзя относиться как к чему-то отдаленному и не касающемуся нас всех остальных, то есть людей, живущих на Западе, в Европе.
What is happening in Russia today cannot be seen as something distant, something that doesn't concern us here, living in Europe.
Нужно понимать, это ядерная держава, где сосредоточено тонны химического, бактериологического оружия, помимо ядерных боеголовок.
It is a nuclear power, plus there are tons of nuclear and chemical weapons.
Относительно России нельзя рассуждать категориями, насколько демократично развивается эта страна или нет.
So you shouldn't talk about Russia in categories of whether it's democratic and how democratic, or is it democratic enough.
Вы знаете, сталинская демократия, сталинская конституция и демократия в свое время превосходили всех демократов мира и все конституции мира.
The Stalin constitution was the most democratic constitution in the world.
Сегодня Путин установил в России, как он продекларировал, управляющую демократию.
So what Putin has established in Russia today is the so-called managed democracy.
Я вас уверяю, сегодня Россия семимильными шагами идет к фашизму.
I assure you, Russia is rushing towards fascism.
И Анна Политковская во всех форумах, где она выступала, как раз таки об этом и говорила.
And this is what Anna Politkovskaya spoke about at all the forums that she attended.
Фашизм не может быть управляемым.
You cannot manage fascism.
Вот благодаря последние несколько лет настроениям, которые сложилось в российском обществе, которые подпитывались именно властями,
The prevailing moods in Russia today, which have been orchestrated and manipulated by the Russian authorities,
поддерживая так называемый президентский рейтинг и подыгрывая самым низменным инстинктам толпы,
so supporting the presidential rating and also playing into the most base instincts of the crowd.
Шестая часть света, где сосредоточено больше всем где-либо ядерного, химического, бактериологического оружия, она стоит на пороге к фашизму.
So this 1/6 of the world landmass with the tons of bacteriological, chemical and nuclear weapons is on its way to fascism.
Я хочу, чтобы вы мои слова не принимали как человека, заинтересованного или предвзято относящемуся к этой стране.
Don't think that I'm a person who is biased against Russia, and that's why I'm speaking these words.
То, что произошло на моей родине, с моим народом и с теми, кто проживает на этой территории, это уже произошло.
What has happened to my people has already happened.
Я вас уверяю, мы самое страшное пережили.
We have lived through the worst.
Все равно мы выжили, несмотря на то, что весь мир нас продал и предал за газ, за нефть, и за то благосостояние, и за благополучие, и просто даже за элементарное, доброе рукопожатие со стороны фашистующего элемента в Кремле.
We have survived, nevertheless, despite the fact that the whole world has betrayed us and sold us for oil and gas, and for even a handshake with the man at the top.
Мы имеем исторический опыт выживания, и мы пережили Сталина, пережили Ельцина, мы переживем, уже пережили и Путина.
We have the history of survival. We have outlived Stalin, Yeltsin, and we are already outliving Putin.
А готов ли выдержать все то, что выдержал чеченский народ, сегодняшняя Европа и постсоветские страны, которые находятся около этой страны и которые подвергаются каждодневному атакам со стороны Кремля?
But is Europe ready for the same trials and tribulations as Chechnya has seen? Are the neighboring countries, the post-Soviet countries, ready for the same fate?
И Анна Политковская как раз говорила об этих кошмарах и об этом надвигающейся опасности ко всему человечеству.
These are the nightmares, this is the danger for the whole mankind that Anna Politkovskaya has spoken about.
За это они ее убили.
This is why she was killed.
Даже после ее гибели они продолжают с ней воевать.
And they're still fighting against her after her death.
Да, Путин был совершенно прав, когда он сказал, что Анна Политковская никак не влияла на российскую общественность.
Yes, Putin was right when he said that Anna Politkovskaya didn't have much influence over Russia, the Russian public.
Да, с ним можно согласиться, потому что Путин не оставил России гражданского общества, оно полностью разрушено.
One could agree with him because there is no civil society left in Russia. It has been destroyed totally.
Но Анна Политковская очень влияла на западные умы, на западный мир и на европейское общество.
But Anna Politkovskaya did have an influence in the West.
С российским обществом Путин не считается, потому что с Россией его ничего не связывает. Путин считается с сомнением здесь, на Западе и в европейском обществе. И правда Политковская была слишком разоблачающей для Путина, чтобы он мог терпеть ее дальше. Спасибо за внимание.
Putin doesn't care about the Russian society. He doesn't give a damn. But he does care about what the West is saying about him, about Russia. And the truth that she spoke about what's happening in Russia was too painful and too intolerable for him. So he had to do something about it.
Just one brief point on what Ahmed was saying, and taking up indeed something Gary was saying earlier about it's the same people as before. I must say that one thing that struck me when I was doing that rapporteur's job, and I only just reported absolutely factually, is how many former KGB people were put into key positions in various parts. It worried me. It seemed to me that certain structures, somebody once said to me cynically, but what's changed in another sense, because the people who were central to KGB were the people who were central to security in the time of the Tsar too. There's a community that perpetuates itself. But anyway, I wanted to make what I thought, I may be wrong, was underlying your question. I wanted to make a point in response. I think your question's very deep, because in the context of the Iraq War, in the context of the Middle East and things that have been happening in Lebanon and so on, I have found myself saying, God, there I was standing in the Commander-in-Chief's office in Moscow, or there I was talking to the Minister of Justice in Moscow, or the Minister of Internal Affairs in Moscow, laying down the law in terms of what was required in terms of decent, transparently committed policy in terms of the human rights and the rest of which we speak. I wonder whether now I could do that with the same confidence in terms of my own credibility. And we're talking about Anna tonight, and I think the great point about Anna was she was about truth and integrity. And if we're about truth and integrity, we have to be prepared to speak as honestly about our own situation as we do about Russia. And of course, that's a huge issue. But only let me say, and I did touch on it earlier, that I get as angry about Guantanamo Bay as I do about things that happen in Chechnya, because it seems to me that nothing could be much better designed to recruit extremists across the world. It just seems to me wrong in itself, but foolish. And the other point that I'd make in this context is, let's look closer at home. I'm on the Joint Committee on Human Rights in Parliament. We brought out our report on the terrorism legislation. And one of the things we said at the beginning of our report, which didn't really get picked up as I hoped it might. In the first paragraph, we said, we believe that government has a responsibility in human rights terms to the protection of the people under its jurisdiction. We went on and said, if, however, the aggregate of what is being done is making a situation more dangerous rather than less dangerous, the government is not fulfilling its human rights obligation to its people in this respect. Of course, the situation is very dangerous. No one must underestimate that. The pressures are acute. The threats are sinister. All that is true. I'm sorry, I am one of those who believe that it's precisely at times like this that you have to stand most resolutely and most determinedly for the principles of human rights, for due process in the law and the rest, because you have to demonstrate you are about something different. And insofar as you begin to trim under the pressures, you're giving the extremists a victory, and you're causing more resentment and antagonism amongst many young people in our own country, which is very dangerous.
In answer to your question, in almost everywhere in Eastern Europe, the intelligence services have been purged. People have lost their jobs. The only people who haven't changed are the military. Military intelligence people, whether it's GRU or the STB and the others all over Eastern Europe, are still there. They haven't been purged. They're still in business, and they're still functioning. And it's still an old boys club. The only place where they've actually had any great movement is East Germany, because they've become part of the system. But if you go to Hungary, if you go to Czech Republic, Slovakia, you find that the people who were there before are still there, and they exert a very important political influence. And if I make one comment, I'm afraid I can't translate it. I can't translate it well. But when I was in Russia, I asked people about democracy, and they said to me, what is the difference between demokrasia and demokratizacja? The same as between canal and canalizacja.
Okay. Another question.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm a journalist from Georgia, and I was the anchor and producer of Political Evening Show. And 2 years ago, we made a program about Chechen rebellions in Georgia, and we have broadcasted the interview of Aslan Maskhadov, and we also had a live with Mr. Zakayev. And first, my program about this issue was closed down during whole months, and second time program was closed down under direct governmental censorship, because we have investigated the very strange test of Georgian Prime Minister Mr. Zurabchivania. And my program closed down. My team and I was fired from TV company, and I was beaten by governor and his bodyguard. So I'm up to them under medical treatment. But the question, maybe it will sound very rhetorical, but the question is, how can we journalists under such a huge and vast governmental pressure, how can we protect our editorial independence? Thank you.
Well, I mean, the answer is the only way that journalists can protect their editorial independence is actually, frankly, through public solidarity. We have to build political movements that respect the right of journalists to be able to work freely. And unfortunately, when you have leaderships which don't respect those rights, even in the West, and I think it's very important, that sets a tone which encourages governments in Georgia and elsewhere to actually be lax and to be repressive as far as journalists and media are concerned. So this isn't actually a problem for journalists. It's a problem for people living within what are termed democracies. It's a problem for civil society. It's a problem for everyone to be able to deal with. One of the things that we're trying to do at the moment with the International News Safety Institute is to put before the Security Council of the United Nations a very simple resolution asking for them to call on the member states of the United Nations to follow international humanitarian law and to properly investigate every time a journalist is killed or a media person is taken out and shot and assassinated. Because the United Nations has not made such a statement. There has never been by the United Nations at its highest levels a simple statement calling on the member states to actually respect international humanitarian law and the rights of journalists. So the answer to your question is, it's not for journalists to find a way to actually sort of somehow protect themselves in these difficult conditions. It's about time we took the political leaderships to task and asked them to deliver on the simple, it's a simple demand. You make law, you make international law, and you make national law. Why, for God's sake, don't you start putting it into effect? That seems to me the sort of movement that we have to build if we're going to create some sort of way of answering some of these problems.
Hi, I'm an English journalist. In listening to the panel, I'm wondering what they think journalists here can do to help. I mean, help sounds very feeble, but in these situations, we sit and we listen and we think, what can we do? I'm a freelance. There's probably very little I can do, but I'd be very interested to know what the panel think of the way the press has covered Chechnya, Russia, Russian politics, recent Russian history, problems in the media, not just as highlighted by Anna Politkovskaya's death, but in the lead up to it, since it's happened, and where they think we should be going in terms of stories exposing all of this and how to go about it.
Feel free to answer. I think we'll try to keep our answers short so we can get a few more questions in if we can. Anybody care to answer this one?
The simple answer, it would be great to have media. I mean, I've just complained about politicians and, their lack of respect for the issues that we did. But it would be great to have media that would respect it as well. We live with a media system very often now which is not investing in good journalism. It's not allowing journalists to investigate properly, to carry out research. So we've actually got to start getting the media to
Could I just say two things? First of all, I'm afraid I'm not quite up on the detail, but I did take heart from some reference I saw today. Was it the Daily Star or something? Yeah. That the journalists had a chapter meeting and had actually got the paper to change its story because they thought the journalists felt that it was going beyond the pale in terms of being provocative to the Islamic and hurtful to the Islamic community. And the paper did change its presentation. Now, I think that if we really care about these issues, we have to be tough. On the issue of Chechnya, I only say this, that what has always frustrated me is that Beslan happens or Anna's death happens, and there's a great flurry of interest for a few days. I, for example, find myself being contacted by quite a lot of journalists, and then everything goes down. And at the time of Beslan, what frustrated me, and because you're the sort of people, at the time of Beslan, because you're the sort of people who come to this gathering, I hope you will understand what I'm going to say. I thought what happened at Beslan was terrible, for the reasons I said earlier. It was terrible in itself, it was counterproductive, it was awful. Therefore, I could understand journalists reporting honestly what they saw and feeling about it. But what was lacking was any kind of context. Because however wrong, and it was very wrong, however counterproductive, and it was very counterproductive, those events at Beslan, what about the persistent action by the Russians week after week, day after day, month after month, over the years? People don't hear that bit of the story. They hear something for a few days when the drama happens. And I think that serious journalists just have to battle with their editors and the rest to get more consistent coverage.
We'll take a question in the back.
I want to ask a question. Right now, tonight, who killed Anna? That's the best thing we can do. I've covered Chechnya. I care about that. I've had a car shot out from under me by the Russians. What we can do, I don't want to hear this about democracy, democrazia, what's the difference? Who killed Anna? That's what we can do. Because that is what's stopping everything, blocking everything. She was killed because she was doing what we try to do. Yes, I covered Chechnya. Yes, I had to walk out of Chechnya. Yes, I cover other places. Who killed Anna. That's what we can do as journalists. And I don't want to hear all this stuff about principles and that and this. Who killed her? That's what we can do.
Я думаю, ответ на этот вопрос надо требовать, безусловно, у Кремля.
Of course, we should demand that the Kremlin answer this question.
Как выразился один ее коллега,
Who killed Anna? That's the question we should be answering tonight.
как выразился один ее коллега, он сказал, пуля в Анну Политковскую была выпущена очень давно.
One of her colleagues said that the bullet that killed her was actually launched or shot a long time ago.
Она только долетела 7 числа.
It only reached her on the 7th.
Я скажу одно. Буквально за 2 месяца до ее гибели мы встречались с Анной Политковской здесь, в Лондоне.
2 months before her death, we met here in London.
Вот дословно ее слова. Я ее очень долго убеждал, уговаривал, говорил, что ей необходимо уехать из России.
I was trying to persuade her in vain that she should leave Russia.
Вот дословно она сказала, Ахмед, я каждый раз вхожу в свой подъезд и ожидаю, что меня убьют. И думаю, когда это произойдет. Или когда я буду входить, или когда я буду выходить.
And I can quote her verbatim. She just said, each time I enter the entrance to my block of flats, I feel I'm just waiting for this moment when I'm going to be killed. And I'm just wondering whether it's going to be on my entrance or on my exit from that block of flats.
Просто сегодня я думаю, что есть даже ценой своей жизни Анна Политковская продолжает бороться с этим преступным режимом, и не только там, но и во всем мире.
And I think just still today, after her death, she somehow continues fighting this regime, not just over there, but in the whole globally.
Я уверен, если эти страсти и эти эмоции не улягутся, это может привести к раскрытию преступления, и это может еще и защитить многих еще живых журналистов от подобной участи.
And if there isn't this calm after the storm, as usually happens, as you describe, if we keep going at it, if we keep talking about it, perhaps her death is going to be investigated, and this would help not only her, but will save lives of journalists all over the world in the future.
Could I just say, the question's absolutely right. Who killed Anna? But Anna, I have absolutely no doubt, from the Anna I was privileged to meet, that she would be saying, and who killed all those hundreds of people who disappeared and were tortured in Chechnya and elsewhere? And it seems to me that if we're to be true to Anna, we have to take her sacrifice as a challenge to look at the issue as a whole.
Wait for a mic, will you?
My name's John Crowfoot. I worked on the Dirty War book. I've got something which will turn into a question, and it might be Yelena Olegovna who could give some kind of response about it. On the evening that Anna was killed, there was a most peculiar and interesting